The obsidian vault of the grand citadel of the unified galactic concordance was not built for the negotiation of surrender. Yet the air in the Chamber of Whispers was thick with the dust of that very possibility, illuminated by the cold, dying light of the distant, perpetually eclipsed binary star that served as the concordance's historical anchor. 2,000 sensory panels, tuned to the political and military frequencies of every client species and sovereign member, pulsed with a sickly, intermittent amber, a visual manifestation of the systemic panic that had begun to grip the established galactic order. The conciliator, a Xylos elder named Vilos, whose carapace was etched with the scars of 100 planetary treaties, and whose cranial fins drooped with the exhaustion of ceaseless, futile mediation, stood at the central null lectern, his form dwarfed by the sheer, overwhelming architecture designed to convey eternal stability, now a mockery against the backdrop of galactic collapse. The assembled council of dozens, representatives from the great spacefaring houses, the economic confederations, the military high commands, and the desperate, scattered remnant governments, shifted in their crystalline seating spheres, the faint hiss of their personal environmental seals a constant, nervous counterpoint to the deep, unnerving silence maintained in the main chamber. For 2 full cycles, Vilos had allowed the telemetry data to spool across the sensory field, a horrifying panorama of loss. Sectors seeded, planetary populations silenced, the catastrophic, methodical advancement of the Cathar hegemony's spearhead fleets, which moved not with the chaotic rush of conquest, but with the cold, undeniable precision of an unstoppable geological process. The true toll, the specific, agonizing loss of life, the methodical eradication of entire lineages, the brutal, genocidal cleansing the hegemony termed systemic integration, was a detail they collectively refused to visualize, a self-imposed censorship driven by the instinct for political survival. They focused instead on the staggering, unsustainable material cost, on the logistical impossibility of continuing the defense, on the simple, brutal fact that their pooled fleets, once a glorious and seemingly infinite shield, were now reduced to scattered, exhausted embers. The conciliator finally moved, the slight click of his articulated digits against the null lectern echoing like a detonation in the hushed space. The Cathar hegemony's final communication, disseminated across all open channels and authenticated beyond doubt, is now displayed, Vilos stated, his voice a dry rasp that nonetheless carried the weight of centuries of Xylos authority. The amber panels shifted to a stark, cold white and a single, stylized ideogram. The crushing fist of the Cathar superimposed itself over the star charts. Their conditional peace offers an end to the current conflict, the cessation of hostilities in exchange for terms that are, in a purely sovereign sense, intolerable. We see the outer rim resource nodes, dissolve all specialized military commands in the border regions, and crucially commit to a 5-cycle tribute of strategic metamaterials. This is the peace they offer. Vilos paused, allowing the raw truth of the subjugation to settle. This is the peace which prevents further loss. A sudden, sharp vocalization burst from the seating cluster reserved for the representatives of the League of Unaligned Systems, their delegate, a small, multi-limbed species known as the Vakoth, trembling visibly in their sphere. Loss. Conciliator, this is not loss, this is annihilation deferred. We cannot trade the memory of the slaughter for a promise written in the blood of our kin. The Cathar defined peace as the silent acquiescence of their victims. They burned our nursery worlds, Vilos. They purged the Silarian sector systematically, and now you speak of tribute. The Vakoth's translator unit sputtered, unable to fully convey the raw, existential terror and moral indignation. A larger, steadier voice, belonging to High Commander Rect of the Federated Militias, a massive, slow-moving sentient whose species had borne the brunt of the immediate military engagements, cut across the Vakoth's frantic protest. Silence, Vakoth! Your passion, while appreciated, obscures the reality of logistics. We have expended our strategic reserves. We are operating at a defensive fraction. The slaughter, the tragic cost of the initial incursions, was a function of our unpreparedness, yes, but it is history. To avoid the continuation of that history on a geometrically increasing scale, we must now consider the pragmatic. The Cathar are not driven by rage, but by cold resource acquisition and structural dominance. They require stability for consolidation. If we provide them with the resources they demand and the structural compliance they crave, they will stabilize. We survive to rebuild, we survive to fight a future war. Rek's argument was the foundation of the pragmatists, a desperate plea for short-term preservation that tasted of ashes in every mouth. The debate raged for what felt like an eternity, a cyclical vortex of moral outrage against logistical exhaustion. Vilos observed the emotional storm, his own internal calculations far cooler, driven by data streams that extended beyond the immediate military theater. He was not swayed by Rex's cynicism or the Vakoth's anguish. He was preoccupied by a single, peripheral data ghost on the far rim of the galactic map, a nascent, unpredictable variable that was injecting a crippling uncertainty into all his projections. "We must address the Terran anomaly," Vilos finally interjected, his voice cutting through the rising clamor like a shard of ice. The chamber instantly silenced, the name itself carrying a weight of the unknown that eclipsed the immediate terror of the Cathar. "The species designated humans by our first contact teams." They arrived in the Proxima sector, far outside the predicted vectors for emerging species, utilizing propulsion signatures that defied established physics and establishing a presence with a startling, almost aggressive quiet. Their technology is an enigma. Their energy readings are immense, yet their emissions profile is almost null. Their political posture is one of absolute, unnerving non-interference. They observe, they monitor, they listen, but they do not speak. They have not responded to a single one of the Concordance's diplomatic overtures, nor have they acknowledged the Cathar's border probes. A xenolinguist delegate from the academic guild spoke, his voice measured but strained. "Conciliator, our analysis of their cultural transmissions suggests a species defined by violent self-determination, a short, bloody history of internal conflict that culminated in a rapid, explosive technological ascent. They are, to put it plainly, chemically and psychologically volatile. They are the definition of an unknown, uncontrolled element. We know nothing of their ethics, nothing of their capacity for empathy on a galactic scale, and absolutely nothing of their true military capability, save that their ship's theoretical power projections defy every classification in our registry. To involve them now is to introduce chaos. The Cathar may be brutal, but they are predictable. The humans are a singularity." Vilos nodded slowly. "Precisely. If we accept the Cathar's terms, we gain immediate, if fragile, stability. We contain the fire even if we must kneel in the smoke. If we refuse the terms, we continue the war, and the first entity the Cathar will encounter in their strategic expansion is this Terran Directorate. That encounter is the ultimate risk. Their involvement could either liberate the galaxy or provoke the Cathar into an apocalyptic, full-spectrum assault against all life, seeing no hope of compliance." The atmosphere curdled with a profound philosophical dread. The question was no longer one of military strategy, but of moral calculus. Was it permissible to sacrifice the abstract ethical outrage of the past, the slaughter, and the dignity of the future for the desperate certainty of the present? The pragmatists prevailed, their voices heavy with the weight of depleted fleets and terrified populations. The Vakoth and a few others voted against, their dissent recorded in the annals as a tragic, principled objection. The unified galactic concordance would send a final diplomatic mission to the Cathar border to finalize the terms of peace, and concurrently, a high-level observation and deterrence envoy would be dispatched to the Terran Directorate's designated communication relay, not to seek alliance, but to implore neutrality, to ensure the volatile, unpredictable humans did not, through an act of misplaced bravado or aggressive misunderstanding, ignite the final, consuming war. The burden of this impossible, morally compromising diplomacy fell upon High Speaker Zarthus, a Xylos of great age and legendary patience, whose history included complex mediations with near-unintelligible gaseous life forms and negotiating mining rights with deeply isolationist hive minds. Zarthus received his mandate with the profound, melancholic sigh characteristic of those who understand that they are being sent to sell the soul of their civilization. His single diplomatic frigate, the Mantle of Compromise, a vessel designed for atmosphere and prestige rather than combat, slipped silently out of the Citadel's docking structure, carrying the desperate hope of a billion worlds that the humans would simply remain silent, aloof, and utterly uninterested in the galaxy's impending self-immolation. The Terran Directorate's assigned relay zone was not a military formation, nor a fortified station, but a vast, silent region of space demarcated by a faint, almost invisible energy field that resonated with a low, constant hum, a frequency that caused the sensory arrays of the Mantle of Compromise to register a subtle, deep pressure. the feeling of an immense, perfectly controlled power source operating just beneath the threshold of perception. Zarthus, standing on the bridge of his frigate, gazed out at the blackness. There was nothing to see. No towering battlements, no visible fleet maneuvers, only the stark, unsettling void framed by the Terran border signature. The contrast to the frantic, over-communicating, heavily armed chaos of the Concordance border regions was absolute. The humans were, in their silence, an eloquent statement of confidence that bordered on arrogance. The mantle hailed the Terran relay for nearly an entire planetary cycle, the request for a diplomatic parley broadcast on every known universal protocol, phrased in the most formal, supplicatory language available. The response, when it finally arrived, was not a voice, but a sudden, single-frame data burst, a precise, mathematically complex set of coordinates detailing a rendezvous point not in a station or a planet, but within a geometrically perfect, silent void pocket far past the initial border markers, and a single, stark linguistic transmission translated by the Xylo's computers as the Terran word, accepted. Zarthus's pilot expressed alarm. "High Speaker, they are requesting we penetrate deep into their sovereign space, an unmapped sector with no navigational aids but their coordinates. This is a profound breach of standard protocol. It suggests either supreme indifference to our safety or a calculated display of dominance." "It suggests they operate on a different set of rules entirely," Zarthus murmured, his ancient sensors extended, tasting the void. "They are not playing the Concordance's game of posturing and political theater. They are demanding immediate, unmediated conversation on their terms. Proceed, pilot. If we are to sell our moral integrity for peace, we must first survive the negotiation with the Silent Ones." The journey to the rendezvous point was unnervingly brief, the human-provided trajectory cutting through space with an efficiency Zarthus's engineers grudgingly admired. The target of the meeting materialized not as an anticipated warship, but as a vessel of stark, functional minimalism. The Terran Directorate Diplomatic Envoy designated the Aurelian Truth. It was a ship of simple, obsidian-black geometry, utterly devoid of ornamentation or visible weapon ports, yet its proximity caused the mantle's security systems to register a subliminal, persistent threat. The Aurelian Truth did not hover. It simply existed in the space, radiating an aura of disciplined, cold capability. The transfer ritual was swift and antiseptic, the environmental seal of the Terran vessel interlocking with the mantle with a soundless, precise engagement. Zarthus and his small retinue were met not by an armed escort, but by a single, relatively young human, devoid of rank insignia save for a simple metallic lapel pin that identified him, according to the pre-transmitted data packet, as Director Elias Vance, the principal negotiator for the Terran Directorate on Galactic Stability. Vance was unremarkable in physical stature, his expression calm to the point of being entirely unreadable, his eyes a color Zarthus's biological sensors registered as a cool, unsettling gray. There was no theatrical greeting, no political preamble. "High Speaker Zarthus, welcome to the Aurelian Truth," Vance stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone translated instantly into the Xylo's dialect. His posture was relaxed, yet every motion, every slight shift in weight, spoke of a profound internal control that Zarthus recognized as far more intimidating than any overt display of aggression. "We are aware of the Concordance's current dilemma and the nature of your mission. We will dispense with the expected formalities. Follow me." Time is a finite resource. Vance led them not to a grand council room, but to a sparse, clinically lit chamber centered around a single, perfectly reflective black table. The atmosphere was less diplomatic hall, more surgical theater. Zarthus's ancient diplomatic training, founded on the principle of reading environmental cues and nonverbal signals, was entirely useless here. The humans offered nothing but an unsettling transparency of purpose. Once seated, Zarthus began his carefully constructed plea, a rhetorical masterpiece designed to appeal to self-interest, historical preservation, and the abstract concept of galactic unity. He spoke of the exhaustion of the Concordance, the necessity of temporary compromise, the pragmatic choice to accept the Cathar's terms to prevent the further unconstrained slaughter. He emphasized that the Cathar sought stability, and that the introduction of a new, unpredictable power like the Terran Directorate at this delicate juncture would only destabilize the entire region, potentially provoking the very annihilation they all sought to avoid. "Director Vance," Zarthus concluded, his voice heavy with sincerity and political fear, The concordance asks only for your continued non-interference. We ask for the patience to conclude a peace, a flawed peace, yes, but a life-saving one. We are purchasing time to heal, to rebuild, and to one day, perhaps, challenge this injustice again. If you intervene now, driven by a warrior's spirit, you force the Cathar's hand against the entire sector. You destroy the only chance for millions of worlds to simply survive the night. We beg you, do not disrupt the difficult path to peace. Elias Vance remained absolutely still, his gray eyes fixed on Zarthus, allowing a long, profound silence to fall after the Xylo's high speaker had finished his statement. The silence was not a pause for consideration, but a space for the weight of Zarthus's words to dissipate, revealing their hollow core. The human finally spoke, his tone not dismissive, but utterly, unnervingly calm, the sound of a verdict being delivered without passion or prejudice. High Speaker Zarthus, Vance began, his voice flat, the Terran Directorate's position is not based on warrior spirit or bravado, but on the cold, dispassionate analysis of data, ethical philosophy, and historical causality. You refer to the Cathar's campaign as a conflict driven by resource acquisition and structural dominance. You describe their demands as a means to achieve stability. And you ask us to support the cessation of hostilities to prevent further loss. Vance leaned forward slightly, his motion barely perceptible, yet the intensity in the room increased tenfold. We must correct your definitions, High Speaker. The Cathar hegemony does not pursue resource acquisition, it pursues systemic theft and elimination. Its structural dominance is predicated on the doctrine of genocidal subjugation. And the peace you seek to purchase is merely the Cathar doctrine of systemic integration written on a diplomatic parchment. It is not stability. It is the absolute, permanent, ethical collapse of the galactic concordance's moral structure. The Xylos felt a chill that transcended the regulated temperature of the room. This human did not feel the moral outrage. He had calculated it. You believe, Vance continued, that because the Cathar have temporarily exhausted their local logistics, they will accept a tribute and stabilize. You are operating on the assumption that the Cathar are a political entity capable of rational, long-term negotiation based on mutual self-interest. Our analysis, conducted using models incorporating over 300 millennia of internally recorded species-on-species conflict, a dataset far larger and deeper than anything the concordance possesses, indicates the absolute opposite. The human gestured to the black table. The surface instantly transformed into a three-dimensional projection, a chillingly accurate recreation of a system known as Celeria 7, one of the lost worlds mentioned by the Vakoth delegate, a place where the slaughter had been particularly horrific. The projection was not of a battle, but of a quiet, methodical process. Cathar vessels orbiting a lush, civilian-populated world, not bombarding, but deploying thousands of small, specialized craft designed not for military action, but for environmental restructuring and population control. The scene was horrifying in its antiseptic efficiency. This is Celeria 7 High Speaker, Vance stated, his voice completely devoid of judgment, presenting the atrocity as a scientific finding. The genocide here was not a military objective, it was a strategic one. The Cathar did not cleanse this world because they needed the land or the materials immediately. They cleansed it because the local life form, a peaceful, non-aggressive fungoid intelligence, possessed a collective memory that could not be purged or compromised. The Cathar eliminate any population whose history and collective memory might, generations later, serve as an ethical counterpoint to the hegemony's narrative of dominance. They are removing the memory of freedom from the galactic consciousness. This systematic elimination of cultural and ethical resistance is the true meaning of the slaughter. Vance met Zarthus's gaze, which was now filled with a dawning, terrible comprehension. The concordance wishes to forget the slaughter for the sake of survival. The humans, High Speaker, remember it for the sake of the galaxy's ethical future. We remember the cost of every life lost, and we have mathematically determined that any peace treaty with an entity whose operational calculus requires the erasure of entire populations is not an accord, but a temporary ceasefire designed to allow the aggressor to consolidate its gains and redefine the rules of engagement for the next, inevitable round. We are not interested in buying a few cycles of peace with the dignity of the D. Zarthus, the seasoned diplomat, found himself utterly unprepared for this confrontation. He was facing not a warrior, nor a politician, but a terrifyingly advanced moral machine that had ingested the history of the Cathar. processed the Concordance's internal political compromises, and spat out the cold, undeniable truth. "Director Vance," Zarthus stammered, his Xylo's translator struggling to keep up with the emotional turbulence, "your analysis is devastatingly correct, but it leads to the same outcome, war. A war we can no longer afford. The Concordance cannot restart the conflict. We will be destroyed. Even with your involvement, the price in lives will be astronomical. Where is the logic in choosing the absolute certainty of wider destruction over the fragile hope of temporary stability?" Vance smiled then, a minute, utterly cold contraction of the facial muscles that did not reach his eyes. "That, High Speaker, is where the Concordance's underestimation of the Terran Directorate leads your calculations astray. You assume we would join your war. We have no intention of joining an unsustainable defense." The projection on the black table shifted. The Celeria 7 data dissolved, replaced by a complex, pulsating three-dimensional model of the entire Cathar hegemony's command and control structure, overlaid with thousands of lines of interwoven data, not military, but logistical, cultural, and psychological nodes. The display was terrifying in its scope and detail, a complete living map of the enemy's very soul. "For the last 50 cycles, since our arrival and before the Cathar made their final push," Vance explained, his voice now taking on an instructional quality, "the Terran Directorate has not been observing or remaining neutral. We have been conducting a full-spectrum analysis of the Cathar hegemony. We did not study their fleets. The destruction of materiel is pointless. We studied their doctrine. We studied the psychological profile of their central command nexus. We modeled their logistical bottlenecks, their political pressure points, and the precise moment of their systemic overextension." He gestured to a series of glowing nodes deep within the Cathar map, not star systems, but specific, high-value command centers. "The Cathar are a hierarchical organism. If you cut off the limbs, the organism merely adapts and regrows. If you excise the central neurological cluster, the organism collapses instantly, cleanly, and permanently. The Concordance's strategy was to fight the hegemony's fleets. Our strategy is to surgically remove the hegemony's capacity for coordinated thought." The projection on the table intensified. "We are not preparing for a war of attrition, High Speaker. We have prepared for a single, focused, preemptive, and non-negotiable strategic counteroffensive. It is designed not to cripple, but to completely and irreversibly dismantle the Cathar command structure in under a single planetary rotation, minimizing collateral damage, and ensuring that the residual, decentralized Cathar elements are forced to accept immediate, unconditional demilitarization and humanitarian oversight, rather than regrouping for a future conflict. We did not wait for the diplomatic process to fail. We waited for the Cathar to prove, through their continued adherence to the doctrine of the slaughter, that they were an existential threat to the integrity of the galactic consciousness." Vance finally delivered the ultimatum, the true, shocking human decision that rendered Zarthus's entire mission moot. "High Speaker Zarthus, the Terran Directorate will not support your peace negotiations. We cannot. Supporting a peace built on systemic genocide is an ethical violation that we have determined is more dangerous to the long-term survival of the galaxy than any short-term military conflict. Our fleets are already in position, operating under absolute silence protocols. The precise moment the Concordance formally signs any surrender or tribute agreement with the Cathar, the moment the hegemony believes it has achieved systemic stability, is the moment we will commence the counteroffensive. We will use the Cathar's moment of perceived triumph as our operational window. You have until the signing ceremony to decide if the Concordance will stand aside, or, perhaps, align itself with the only entity in the galaxy that remembers the slaughter, and possesses the will and the capacity to ensure it can never, ever be repeated." Zarthus, the ancient diplomat, felt his reality fracture. He had come to bargain for neutrality based on weakness and fear. He was leaving with an offer for alliance based on overwhelming, terrifying, and profoundly ethical power. The humans were not chaotic, unpredictable aggressors. They were disciplined, logical executioners of a complex moral imperative, a species that had clearly transcended the basic instincts of political expediency for a cold, hard, data-driven philosophy of a absolute justice. The sheer scale of their preemptive preparation, the depth of their intelligence gathering, it was the true, overwhelming reveal. They had not just arrived in the galaxy, they had solved the Cathar problem before the established powers had even finished counting their losses. The return to the Citadel was a journey of profound, silent internal conflict for Zarthus. He had witnessed a new form of power, one that defied the traditional metrics of fleets and resource control. It was a power rooted in absolute, uncompromised ethical clarity, backed by a technical capacity that made the Concordance's own military infrastructure appear laughably archaic. His report to the Council of Dozens was delivered not with the usual diplomatic gravitas, but with a stark, brutal honesty that bypassed the political niceties. The reaction in the Chamber of Whispers was explosive. The pragmatists, led by High Commander Recht, saw the humans' decision as an act of pure, unadulterated aggression, a reckless gamble that would provoke the Cathar into a final, apocalyptic response, dragging the Concordance down with them. "It is megalomania," Recht roared, his massive form shaking with righteous fear. "They are an unknown, unproven quantity challenging a hegemony of 10,000 years. They threaten to commence a conflict precisely at the moment of our negotiated peace. This is not alliance, this is extortion. They want us to become their unwilling shield in a reckless campaign of moral vanity." The Vakoth delegate, however, was weeping, a soundless chemical discharge of pure relief. They remember. They saw Sileria 7. They saw the true cost. They are the only ones who did not succumb to the political temptation of forgetting the slaughter. If they possess even a fraction of the capabilities Zarthus describes, then this is not the end. This is the final, impossible opportunity. Conciliator Vilos, whose hope was flickering like a dying ember, struggled to maintain order. The moral argument is compelling, but the logistical reality remains. If we defy the Cathar, their retaliation against the remaining Concordance infrastructure is immediate and total. Director Vance offers a solution that is too clean, too fast, too efficient. It is a terrifying risk, a chance to gamble everything on the logic of an alien species we have known for mere cycles. The Cathar have issued a final confirmation of the peace signing ceremony. It is scheduled for the next rotation. We must vote. Do we sign the peace, accepting the risk of the human counteroffensive, or do we stand with the Terran Directorate, accepting the risk of immediate Cathar annihilation? The debate was the last, desperate stand of the old political order against the terrifying simplicity of a new, uncompromising truth. The vote was slow, agonizing, split between the desire for survival and the shame of the inevitable ethical compromise. Before the final tally could be rendered, a piercing alarm, a sound of absolute crisis, tore through the Chamber of Whispers. The sensory panels, which had been set to the low, humming frequency of negotiated peace, flared into a blinding, emergency red. A frantic data burst from the Cathar border security system, overrode all other channels. The conciliator Vilos immediately brought the data to the fore. "High Commander Recht, report," Vilos demanded, his voice strained. "Conciliator, it is the Cathar," Recht shouted, his internal military data stream confirming the devastating truth. "They did not wait for the signing. Their advance elements have executed a simultaneous, preemptive strike against the remaining forward defense outposts, precisely those facilities we were scheduled to demilitarize under the terms of the treaty. They are not consolidating. They are executing a final, treacherous flanking maneuver. The peace was a structural deception, a final trap. Our remaining defensive fractions are collapsing. The hegemony spearheads are now on a direct vector for the core Concordance worlds." The betrayal was total, absolute, and confirmed the Terran Directorate's cold, data-driven analysis with terrifying finality. The Cathar had never intended peace. They intended a final, decisive slaughter of the core systems, while the Concordance was preoccupied with the details of its own surrender. Recht's pragmatism, Vilos's cautious hope, all dissolved in the face of the Cathar's unyielding, genocidal doctrine. The Concordance was annihilated not by force, but by a failure of moral recognition. In the ensuing panic, Zarthus, his composure returning, seized the null lectern. "Conciliator, the humans were correct. Their logic was perfect. We must contact Director Vance. We must align. We must inform them that the Cathar have initiated the absolute attack. We have nothing left to lose." But before the distress signal could be manually generated, the sensory panels in the Chamber of Whispers flashed, not red, but a brilliant, startling emerald green, a color that did not correspond to any known Concordance alert system. A new data stream, immense, complex, and utterly stable, replaced the chaotic emergency traffic. The signal originated from the Terran relay zone, the Aurelian Truth's last known location. It was not a communication, but a live, full-spectrum, data-rich tactical visualization delivered with the absolute calm of a final, irrevocable action. ACTIII, unity and larger twist. The Council of Dozens watched in stunned, terrified silence as the Terran data stream unfolded across the Grand Citadel's visualization space. It was the Cathar command map, the same one Director Vance had shown Zarthus, overlaid now with hundreds of points of light, not fleets, but focused, instantaneous energy signatures. The visual display, though complex, was easy to interpret in its terrifying simplicity. The Cathar spearhead fleets that had just assaulted the Concordance outposts were not engaged in combat. They were simply vanishing. The human counteroffensive, executed precisely at the Cathar's moment of psychological and structural overextension, was not a conventional battle. The Terran Directorate had not deployed heavy armadas for a clash of mass and energy. Instead, a dispersed network of small, hyper-efficient Terran vessels, virtually invisible on conventional Concordance and Cathar scanners, had executed a synchronized, galaxy-wide attack on the command and control infrastructure. The energy signatures visible on the screen were not weapon fire, but the instantaneous, surgical de-energization and isolation of every central Cathar command node across a vast quadrant of space. It was not a military strategy. It was an infrastructural extermination. The Cathar spearheads, driven by complex instantaneous command data streams, were suddenly rendered inert, their systems frozen, their internal control sequences corrupted, their capacity for coordinated action vaporized. Individual ships continued to move, their captains following decades-old, programmed response protocols, but the central, genocidal intelligence that drove the hegemony was gone. The remaining Cathar vessels were now nothing more than scattered, rudderless hulks, their capacity to initiate the slaughter, reduced to localized acts of futile, disorganized violence. The entire monolithic Cathar hegemony had collapsed, not under the weight of a grinding war, but under the single, cold, ethical hammer blow of the Terran Directorate's surgical precision. The operation was over in less than 1/10 of a planetary rotation. The war, which the Concordance had lost over a dozen cycles, was won in moments. High Commander Recht, who had argued vehemently for the humans' aggressive unpredictability, slumped in his seating sphere, his massive, seasoned body shaking not from fear, but from the profound, crushing realization of his own species' technological and philosophical inadequacy. They had been fighting a war of bodies and metal. The humans had fought a war of information and command structure. The Terran Directorate's commitment to minimizing collateral damage, to achieving absolute victory without recourse to planetary bombardment or massed, destructive engagements, was the final, staggering reveal of their character. They had eliminated the threat of the slaughter without initiating a second one. Conciliator Vilos, his cranial fins now fully erect, a sign of extreme mental stimulation, stared at the silent, emerald map. "They did it," he whispered, the sound raw with disbelief. "They did not just win, they achieved a victory that conforms to an ethical ideal the Concordance had forgotten how to pursue. They understood the Cathar, they calculated the moral compromise of peace, and they acted with a cold, terrifying efficiency that proves their memory of the slaughter was not vengeance, but a foundational, guiding principle." A new, calmer signal entered the Chamber of Whispers, the resonant baritone of Director Elias Vance. He was not on the screen, his presence remaining an auditory phantom in the revitalized chamber. "Conciliator Vilos," Vance's voice stated, utterly composed. "The Cathar hegemony's capacity for coordinated offensive action has been functionally terminated. Residual elements will require sector-level stabilization and humanitarian oversight, the mandate for which will be transferred immediately to the Unified Galactic Concordance, with full logistical support from the Terran Directorate. The threat of the immediate, systemic slaughter is over. The terms of peace are now dictated by those who did not capitulate to fear." Vance paused, and the weight of his next words settled on the Council like a newly discovered law of physics. "We are now initiating the next phase of our stabilization protocol. This requires the full, immediate, and unconditional alignment of the Concordance's deep space observation arrays with RAN Directorate frequency protocols. This is not a request for an Alliance high speaker. It is a declaration of a shared, necessary operational imperative." The sheer audacity of the demand, the immediate near-total integration of Concordance intelligence infrastructure, would, under normal circumstances, have resulted in a declaration of war. But the circumstance was the sight of a galactic-scale existential threat being eradicated by a silent, ethical hand in moments. The Council voted, this time with a swift, absolute, unified consensus that transcended politics. They assented. The concordance was placing its faith, its future, and its very memory into the hands of the humans. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense surgical coordination. The Terran Directorate was not an invader. It was an overwhelming, disciplined administrative force. Their personnel, calm, logical, and tirelessly professional, worked side by side with the humbled concordance authorities, orchestrating the demilitarization of the Cathar remnants and ensuring the protection of the newly liberated worlds. The humans demonstrated an unnerving depth of knowledge regarding local cultural sensitivities, political structures, and humanitarian needs that entirely belied their short time in the galaxy. Their actions were defined by a profound, logical empathy, a realization that the true foundation of galactic security lay not in strength, but in the stable, ethical governance of all life. The memory of the slaughter, the defining trauma of the last cycles, was slowly beginning to transform from an object of fear and denial into a foundational principle of a new, unified galactic structure. High Speaker Zarthus, now working directly with Director Vance at the newly established Joint Operational Command on the remnants of the Cathar border, found himself in a constant state of philosophical reevaluation. He saw in the humans the terrifying realization of his species' potential, a people who had learned the hard lessons of internal violence and applied them, ethically and effectively, to the cosmic scale. He finally cornered Vance one solar cycle, during a brief, silent moment of relative calm amidst the logistical storm. "Director Vance," Zarthus began, his voice lowered, a private inquiry escaping the protocols of the command center. "The scale of your preparation, the depth of your Cathar analysis, it is simply too vast, too complete for a species that has only recently entered the established galactic community. You possessed a level of detailed intelligence that the Concordance could not have accumulated in 10 millennia of dedicated observation. You knew the Cathar's collapse vectors before their expansion even reached our borders. Why? What drove this absolute, unwavering focus on this particular threat, this single-minded, silent preparation that extended beyond the immediate defense of your own territory?" Vance, who had been reviewing a complex data scroll detailing the psychological needs of the newly liberated Silarian fungoid intelligence, looked up, his expression remaining neutral, yet his gray eyes held a distant, searching quality that Zarthus had not seen before. "High Speaker," Vance replied, his voice soft, almost meditative. "The immediate threat of the Cathar hegemony was merely a local, logistical problem. The true reason for our rapid deployment and deep spectrum analysis is related to the very first signal we detected upon establishing our initial interstellar array. It is the reason we came to this sector of the galaxy, and the reason we could not permit an unstable, genocidal polity like the Cathar to be the dominant political structure when this information was finally ready for dissemination." Vance gestured to a secondary terminal, one that had been shielded from all concordance access since the Alliance began. On the screen, a new projection began to form, not a tactical map, but a stark, abstract model of intergalactic space. The yawning, unimaginably vast gulf between the Concordance's own spiral arm and the nearest, lesser-known satellite galaxy. "Before we encountered the Cathar, before we encountered you," Vance continued, his voice gaining an epic resonance, "the Terran Directorate's long-range sensor networks detected an anomaly, a faint, perfectly structured gravitational wave signature, repeating with a mathematical precision that defies any natural or known artificial source. The source of this wave is located deep in the absolute void, tens of millions of light-years outside any populated galactic structure." The projection zoomed in on the void pocket, and a single, infinitesimally small data point pulsed with a low, ancient light. "We dedicated years of silent observation to this signal," Vance explained. "We applied every known discipline, mathematics, theoretical physics, history, philosophy, and xenolinguistics, to decoding its meaning. The signal is not a warning. It is not an attack plan. It is not even a communication. It is a census marker." Vance turned back to Zarthus, the look in his eyes now one of profound, cold wonder. "The signal is a continuous, self-correcting, gravitational marker left by an intelligence that has transcended any known form of life or technology. It is a recording device, left to monitor the evolution of life across the entire galactic cluster. It has been there for an epoch so vast that our own concept of time is meaningless to it. But what we have determined," through the decoding of the embedded data, is its specific function. The marker is designed to record the political, ethical, and sociological stability of the dominant, sector-governing polity at the point of its discovery. It is charting the progress of emergent galactic civilization. Zarthus was utterly speechless. The Cathar War, the slaughter, the Concordance's compromise, the human counteroffensive, all of it had been a footnote to an event of unimaginable cosmic magnitude. The marker is a test, high speaker, Vance concluded, the words ringing with the philosophical weight of the ultimate frontier. It is not an active intelligence, but a data gate, and the nature of the data it records will define the next stage of interaction with the entity that placed it there. We realized that if the census marker was discovered while the dominant galactic power was the Cathar hegemony, a species that defined its stability through systematic, unchecked genocide, or even the frightened, compromised concordance, the resulting data would be a testament to failure, to an emergent civilization that had not yet learned the basic, ethical necessity of protecting all life. The Terran Directorate did not fight the Cathar merely to save the galaxy from destruction, Vance stated, his gaze unflinching. We fought them to save the galaxy's philosophical and ethical reputation for the moment of its greatest cosmic scrutiny. We had to ensure that when the marker recorded the dominant power, it recorded a civilization, or a coalition of civilizations, capable of moral clarity, restraint, and an unwavering memory of injustice. We could not allow the Cathar's genocidal shadow, the slaughter, to be the final, damning chapter in this sector's cosmic history. The full truth of the human motivation was revealed. They had not been acting out of political self-interest or military expansionism. They had been performing a necessary, high-stakes, surgical cleansing of the galactic conscience in preparation for a silent, profound first contact, with an intelligence that measured civilizations by their moral integrity. The memory of the slaughter was not merely a rallying cry. It was the ethical criterion by which the humans judged the entire galactic political structure. Zarthus looked at the projection of the ancient, silent marker in the void. He looked back at Elias Vance, the calm, logical executor of a cosmic moral imperative. The galaxy had begged for a shallow, immediate peace built on compromise and denial, a peace that would have ensured the Cathar's genocidal legacy. But the humans had remembered the true cost, the ethical necessity of absolute justice, and in their devastating, controlled power, they had secured not just survival, but the very philosophical integrity of their entire civilization in the eyes of the silent cosmos. The unified galactic concordance, now transformed into the bedrock of the new galactic alliance, stood on the precipice of an unknown, terrifying, and infinitely promising future, united under the shadow of a species that was as ethically profound as it was technologically overwhelming. The lesson was complete, the fear now tempered by a profound, humbling respect. The galaxy had been saved not by its leaders' desperate pleas for surrender, but by the disciplined, cold logic of those who refused to let the memory of the innocent slaughter fade. The Terran Directorate, the silent guardians, had cleared the path to the stars, and now the true, silent work of cosmic diplomacy was about to begin. The universe was vast, and the alliance, led by the species that remembered and judged, was finally ready to face it.